Well, good morning everybody and welcome to the Dorset Council Northern Area Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Sherry Jesperson and I'm chair of this committee. The meeting is being live streamed to the public and the media, and a very warm welcome to anyone who's with us this morning on this glorious morning. And a copy of the recording will be available on the Dorset Council website at a later date. My first task then this morning is to take an alphabetical roll call of the members who are with us here this morning. So members, if you would, when I call your name, if you could please unmute, say you're present and then mute again. You know the routine by now. So Councillor John Andrews.
Present.
Councillor Tim Cook.
Present.
Councillor Les Fry.
Present.
Councillor Matt Hall.
Present.
Councillor Brian Heatley.
Present.
Councillor Carol Jones.
Present.
Councillor Emma Parker.
Present.
Councillor Mary Penfold.
Present.
Councillor Val Pothecary.
Present.
Councillor Belinda Rideout.
Present.
Councillor David Taylor. No, good. And myself. Right, that's lovely. Thank you very much. We also have a number of Dorset Council officers with us this morning to make the meeting run smoothly. I'll just briefly run through who they are and they will introduce themselves when they speak. So we have Hannah Smith, Planning Area Manager, Steve Savage, Transport Development Manager, Lara Altry, who's our solicitor, James Litton-Trevors, Senior Planning Officer, Philip Longhurst, Planning Officer, Jill Whitney, Planning Technical Support Officer. I think Jill is doing our readings today. Megan Rochester and Pauline Weld, Democratic Services, and they are producing the meeting. And last but by no means least, we have George Dare, our Committee Democratic Services Officer, who keeps us all in line so well. So welcome to you all and thank you very much for coming. So a brief word then about procedures for the benefit of people viewing the meeting. So for each application, I will invite the case officer to present their report and recommendations, followed by presentations from other officers as appropriate. Members of the public have been invited to submit written representations to a maximum of 450 words, and all of these representations have been seen by committee members and considered by the officers. Up to 3 submissions in support and 3 against can be read to the committee by an officer. Following these representations, members can ask questions for clarification. And then when we've dealt with the questions, we move on to the debate and the committee then has a discussion and comes to a view. At the end of that, I will take the vote by roll call. And when I call committee members' name, they will say for or against or abstain. Now we have 2 agenda items before us this morning, so I have no planned break because I'm not anticipating a long meeting. However, in the interest of democracy, you can take as long as you need, and if we so we'll see how we go with regard to the break, comfort break. Right, so if we could move on to our agenda then, please. Are there any apologies from absence? We have apologies, I think, from David Taylor.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you very much. Members, do any of you wish to declare an interest in any of the items before us this morning? If you could indicate in the chat bar. Nobody does. Okay, that's lovely. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting of the 23rd of March are a correct record? And I will, if you have any corrections to the minutes, indicate in the chat bar and I will take silence as assent. Councillor Pothecary, I've just seen your request to speak come up. Is this about the minutes or Councillor Pothecary, tell us what you'd like to say.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It's about our second application.
Thank you.
I won't be voting, but I would like to speak before it's discussed by the members.
Lovely, thank you. I will come to you first as chairman then, and we note that you won't be voting on it. Thank you very much. And we're back to the minutes. I will take them as a true record. Excellent. So public participation and how that works I have covered. So moving on then to our first agenda item, which is agenda item 5A. This is to erect 18 homes for new access and car parking on the former ATS Euromaster site in New Road, Shaftesbury. The case officer is James Lytton-Trevors. I know James was having a little trouble joining the meeting this morning. James, are you there to give us your report?
Chair, no, James isn't online, so I present the, it's Hannah Smith.
Thank you very much. Hannah Smith, if you would like to present the report, that's very helpful. Over to you, Hannah. Thank you very much. We have the report on our screen, if that's, oh, now we have you on our screen. There we are. We have your slides now. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Chair. So the application is for 18 dwellings on a brownfield site within the settlement boundary of Shaftesbury, which is one of the main towns in the former North Dorset district area. There is a previous planning permission to erect a care home on this site, which was for more dwellings than proposed now. Now we have a mixture of dwellings and flats on the site, with 18 houses proposed on the site itself. So just running through the context of the site, it's located in, bear with me, oh, hang on. No, thank you. It's located, like I've said, in the settlement boundary of Shaftesbury. This is the application site here. It's in a very central location within the town. It's opposite the public car park to the former supermarket. It was in central location here. The access is from the front here, and there'll be a vehicular access into the site and parking provided. So here's a closer look at the site and its constraints. You can see here that's on the edge of the conservation area. So it's not within it, but it's within its immediate setting. You can see the boundary of the conservation here. It's shaded in green. Also, a number of listed buildings surrounding the site. The public house here opposite, and also the care home on the corner here, and various other listed buildings within the town centre, which are shown in pink on this plan, and also quite a few enclosures that are listed as well around the site. So one of the key constraints is obviously the setting of the conservation area and the setting of listed buildings surrounding the site. So this shows the sort of quantum of development that's proposed. You can see the care home that was permitted previously, which took up much more of the site because it had an underground car park that was proposed on that scheme. You can see that outlined in blue. And then you can see the extent of the proposal today. So you'd have an area of built form along the street frontage to get that enclosure to the street here with dwellings and a terrace proposed. And then at the rear of the site here, you'd have a block of flats, which sort of utilises the site in a way that still provides adequate amenity space here, but also a good amount of dwellings in this sort of sustainable location to help with the land supply situation. You can see on this plan here the neighbours surrounding the site. So there's a modern infill development here of dwellings that sort of bound the site quite closely here. You have the care home, which is located here, which is flatted development. Then you have a dentist surgery here, which bounds the site to the north here. To the rear of the site, the land drops away steeply down towards the Enmore Green direction here, but it is treed along here, so you have got some screening, and it would be viewed from the lower slopes in the context of the built form that runs along the ridge here. So this is the elevation that would front the high street. So it's a key location within the conservation area. Within the setting of the conservation area. So it's a key location for coaches coming into the town that park in the main car park. So it's a real focal point. And at the moment, you'll see the photographs. It's a unused site, and the buildings have been demolished. So getting a use back into this site that has much more presence and a design that's considered to be compatible with the character of Shaftesbury would be considered an enhancement. Here's the rear of those units here. You can see because of the levels across the sites, there is some requirement for steps across the site because of the drop-in levels. So this is the block at the rear. You can see the mass of the previous scheme that was proposed, and at the rear it broadly follows the scale of the proposal, but it's much reduced along the frontage here. This is the outline of the previously approved flatted scheme here. So at the rear, there's this element of the scheme is slightly different in terms of its character, but it's still compatible with the sort of character surrounding it. It takes more reference potentially from the care home development, but it's still of a quality design in terms of its appearance and scale. So again, this is some sections through the site, so you can see the development surrounding it. You can see here the dentist surgery and the flatted scheme. You can see it's broadly of an equivalent scale of what surrounds it. And then here's a section through the site, shows the flats at the rear, and then you can see the ground drops away steeply here. But you have the benefit of some vegetation here, which would afford some screening. And car parking is proposed in the middle here to service the development. So the highway officer will go on to talk more about the highway arrangements, but it is built so that a refuse vehicle can access the site and leave, being able to turn here. So it's been designed in that way. Adequate parking provided here for the development too. So here's some photos of before. This is when the ATS site was in use. You can see there's no defined footpath along the frontage here, and this would be reinstated. I know on the previous scheme, and there was concerns about people accessing the town centre, but there's not potential for a crossing point here because of the potential conflict with car users and also pedestrians. So it does have the benefit of the footpath here, but there's not potential for any further enhancements, and they're not required to make the development acceptable. You can see here's the care homes. This is the older part of the building here, and then there's a modern large wing at the back in this location here, and this is the dentist surgery. So this is the site today. You can see that it's boarded off with the development on there demolished. So you can see this is a sort of a key location here, because opposite where we're standing is the main car park to the town centre. This is the view looking down King's Hill. You can see there's quite adequate separation here between the buildings and also the accommodation as well, because this is sort of the access to the care home here. So this is a useful sort of view down the high street, down towards the historic core, and you can see how close it is to the historic elements of Shaftesbury here. It's right on the edge of the conservation area, as I said before, and this is the town centre car park here, a key location. So having new development here, which sort of really does accord with the existing development in terms of there's much more enclosure to the footpath here, and very little footpath actually in this location. So it would very much be in character to get rid of this large amount of hard standing here and have a development that sort of fronts the highway and provides that sense of sort of surveillance and enclosure to the street. So this is the, just to give some context of what was approved previously, it's not before members today, but this is the sheltered scheme, age restricted scheme that was proposed, which did take up a lot more of the site, but it did have an underground car park proposed. It did allow for slightly more landscaping because the car parking was located under here. So the current scheme has slightly less landscaping, but there is potential for some soft landscaping in the scheme. And this is just the elevations of the previous proposal. So it's broken up into elements to make it look like it sort of evolved over time, with an old element here and then the main mass of the building here. But this application hasn't come forward, and the application before councillors today is the scheme for the housing and the fewer number of units. So in terms of the main considerations, the location of the development is considered to be acceptable. It's within the settlement boundary, and there's benefits that there would be benefits of the scheme coming forward in terms of redeveloping the site in a key location. The loss of employment is considered to be outweighed by the benefits of bringing the site forward and the enhancements to the character of the area. The application has gone through an assessment by the district valuer to look at the viability of the scheme. And the district valuer looked at all the relevant inputs, looked at the sales values and the existing use value and all the other relevant inputs. And this independent assessment led to the conclusion that the scheme can't contribute towards affordable housing and still be viable. And therefore we have to take this into consideration, and we can't insist on affordable housing in this instance. However, the scheme can still contribute towards other contributions, so open space contributions and the other contributions listed in the report, and education. So that is required to make the scheme viable, and that's why we can't insist on the normal policy requirement of 30% affordable housing that we normally would in the Shaftesbury area. In terms of movement and access, this is considered to be acceptable. There's no highway objection to the scheme. In terms of the character and appearance of the area, the scheme was considered to enhance the setting of the conservation area and listed buildings in the area. And in terms of amenity, it's been designed so that it wouldn't adversely impact on the amenity of the surrounding land users in the area. Thank you, Chair.
Letting me unmute. Thank you, Hannah, very much. I'd now like to ask Steve Savage, Transport Development Manager, if he would like to comment on the report. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I'm here providing the comments of the Highway Authorities as statutory consultee.
Thank you.
As you've heard, the site already has planning consent to provide 28 sheltered apartments access from Kings Hill. The current proposal will also provide vehicular access to the site via Kings Hill into an at-grade car park, which will provide 19 surface car parking spaces and an associated turning area. Within the basement of Block B, there will be another 16 spaces, bringing the total up to 35. Now, Kings Hill, which you can see on the drawing, is a private access road. It's not an adopted highway, and it currently serves an existing assisted living accommodation adjacent to the site and a small number of.
Could I just interrupt? Could we have some? Could we have the report back up to help Steve, because he's referencing, but we have on the screen. We don't have the report on the screen anymore.
Thank you, Hannah.
That's better. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so as I was saying, Kings Hill serves some existing a small number of residential dwellings and the assisted living accommodation directly opposite, which you can just see on the left of the screen. The proposal will permanently be closing the access from the site onto New Road, the frontage, that previously served the ATS tyre depot at its junction with Bleak Street, and replacing it with a full height curb and reinstating the footway. The previous unit, as you saw on the photo, I don't know if you could just go on to the ATS photo, please, Hannah. Thank you. It had a parking forecourt to the front of the site, which was accessed via a lengthy drop curb. Now, the removal of this wide access in close proximity to the road junction and the public car park immediately opposite is considered to be a highway safety benefit at this location. The proposal will also be widening the existing narrow footway that runs along the northern side of Kings Hill providing a benefit to both the new residents and other users of that road. If you can just go to the plan before that, please, Hannah. This is the swept path analysis for the refuse vehicle, a standard Dorset Waste Vulture vehicle, proving that it can enter and exit the site in a forward gear. As you'll see from the officer's report, the applicant has confirmed that they have written permission from the owner of the private access road for the refuse vehicle to drive along it and access the site. In terms of traffic generation, it's predicted that it could generate up to 9 or 10 vehicle movements during the peak hour period. That's a two-way movement, which is effectively 1 every 6 minutes. Whilst this is marginally more than was previously approved for the consented scheme, it can't be thought to be severe when it's considered in terms of the MPPF and will not result in a detrimental impact on the local highway network. So in summary, Chair, the Highway Authority is satisfied that the proposed development provides appropriate mitigation to negate its impact by virtue of improving pedestrian facilities and general highway safety in the immediate area, and consequently the Highway Authority has recommended a conditional approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Steve. We have 3 representations from the public to be read to us this morning. Mr. Gritton, who's objecting, Mrs. Yoxall, the chairwoman of Abbeyfield House, who's objecting, and then Ken Park, the planning consultant, on behalf of the applicant. So if we could hear those 3 representations, please.
Certainly. Good morning. I'm Jill Whitney, and I'm going to read Mr. Grindon's comments against the application. I'm writing to object to the above planning application. Objections have been raised by local residents about the size, vertical scale, and number of residences of the proposed development. In November 2020, small amendments to the plans were issued. These have failed to address the core issues, and I urge council members to reject this application on its current proposal. The objections of local residents centred on the following themes. Traffic access to site. The proposed access point to the site joins the narrowest part of Bleak Street. The additional traffic of 18 homes feeding into this narrow bottleneck from a 4th axis will have a considerable impact on traffic congestion. Pedestrians will find it significantly more difficult to cross the road. Figure 10.1 of the North Dorset local plan states that designs should put people before traffic. This proposal seems to ignore that policy. Sympathy with local conservation area. The proposed development is not in keeping with the local area, and the materials proposed for Block A are at odds with the adjacent King's Arms and Pepperell House. Many visitors to Shaftesbury's important tourist trade arrive in the Bell Street car park and will gain their first impressions from the surrounding buildings. Policy from the North Dorset Plan Figure 10.1 articulates that where a development affects an existing public space, it should be safe, attractive, uncluttered, and well related to the surrounding buildings. It also sets out policy on scale and massing. The proposed development seems to bear little relation to or balance with the adjoining buildings and the local conservation area. Block B, elevations and orientation. What is not immediately obvious from the plans is how high Block B will sit compared to the dwellings in the area. The document, revised site sections 207B, show how the 3-storey building will be elevated to the horizontal as the rear of the plot drops away down the sharp escarpment. To local properties, Block B will appear like a 4-storey building. The document, revised Block B elevations 206B, shows that windows from the proposed flats will have direct line of sight into the living areas of the dwellings in Abbeyfield House, Kings Hill and New Road. Without doubt, this will harm the amenity and significantly diminish the privacy of residents. This would be in direct contravention of the North Dorset Local Plan, paragraph 10.1 5.61 and 10.77, which states that where development of an overbearing nature is proposed, or where the enjoyment of the existing properties is significantly diminished, planning permission will be refused. As argued by local residents, the current proposals seem overly ambitious and in breach of many of Dorset Council's planning policies. And that's the end of those comments. Would you like me to continue with Barbara Yoxall?
Yes, please.
Okay. So this is from Barbara Yoxall, Chairwoman of Abbeyfield House, against the application. My statement is on behalf of all who live, work or volunteer at Abbeyfield House, Bleak Street, Shaftesbury, and is as follows. 1. All our original objections still stand. 2. The revised planning application does not address any of our concerns. 3. The site plan still refers to 9 houses and 15 flats. Please confirm, is this an error? And the following comments are from Ken Park Planning Consultants. Do you wish me to continue?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
So this is a statement on behalf of the applicant. The proposals seek to provide a mixed residential development comprising a mixture of houses and flats. The site is currently vacant and derelict and contributes negatively to the character and appearance of the area. The principle of residential development on the site has already been considered acceptable by way of a previous approval which remains extant. The current proposals further add to the supply of housing within the area. The proposals represent sustainable development, making efficient use of a vacant, previously developed site within a town centre location. The presumption in favour of the development therefore strongly applies both due to sustainability credentials and due to boosting the supply of housing within an area where there is an unmet demand. The proposals represent less development than the extant sheltered housing scheme. The layout, scale, form and design of the proposals has been carefully considered, and the proposals are appropriate to the character and contents of the area and represent an acceptable development in design terms. The proposals present a traditional design form, picking up on design principles of the extant approved scheme. The proposals have also been carefully arranged to ensure that there is no harm to any adjoining properties. The proposals are appropriate in all regards. They represent sustainable development and planning permission can reasonably be granted. The applicants respectfully request that members support the officer recommendation. And that's the end of the comments.
Thank you very much indeed, Jill. I now move on to member questions, and while members are deciding if they have any questions, could we just first of all clarify Barbara Yoxall's question about the reference to 9 houses and 15 flats at some point in the report? Could we just clear that up?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The correct number is set out in the report in the description of development, and it's 9 houses and 9 flats. So Block A would comprise 9 houses and Block B would be 9 flats.
Lovely, thank you very much. Your questions are coming in thick and fast. So Councillor Matt Hall, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've got a number of questions and I apologise to officers if it's in the report. It's just I've had some IT issues. A lot is made about Dorset Waste Partnership having the written permission to use Kings Hill. I presume that everybody else would have that same permission. It just seems strange that it's written to highlight waste but not any other vehicles. On page 46, it refers to, and I quote, "Buff brick has not been used locally with success." I'm sorry, can that be explained? I have this visions of every time a bricklayer tries to build a wall, it falls down. On page 48, with regards to drainage, it refers to a mechanical pump. Sorry, I couldn't see where that was on the location, and would the noise from the pump be an issue? Also on page 48, what is is there any difference between a soakaway and the crate soakaway that is mentioned? And finally, I know members over the course of this last year have perhaps got a little frustrated with my comments with regards to trees, but can I just say that the way this report is written with regards to trees and landscaping, I find to be absolutely fantastic and spot on. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Hannah, can you address these questions one at a time, please? And thank you, Councillor Hall, for your remarks about landscaping. We don't at all get fed up with your comments. In fact, we are always very glad to have your expertise. Hannah.
Thank you, Chair. So the first reference was to buff brick. I think the reference in the report is that it hasn't been used and been successful in terms of being in character with the area. So it was the type of brick. So it's a light coloured brick that isn't really characteristic of Shaftesbury. So I think all that's saying is the right brick would have to be used there that's more compatible with the character of Shaftesbury. So it's not about the construction in terms of it falling down. It's about it not being in character with Shaftesbury, basically, which is true. There isn't a lot of local brick that is that light buff sort of cream colour. So through the conditions, it'd be important to get the right colour brick for the site because it is so prominent. The next question was about the mechanical pump. That shouldn't cause any issue because that's about the drainage situation. So it's not going to be a mechanical pump in terms of ventilation or extraction. So there shouldn't be any concerns about that at all. In relation to the soakaway, it's just a different construction of soakaway. And I'm not an expert, sorry, on soakaways, but it's about the type of soakaway that would be used for the scheme and what's appropriate. We would get detailed comments on that from our flood drainage department, and they would be able to comment on which type of drainage is the most appropriate for the site and what ensures that the drainage works successfully. I'm sorry, Councillor, if I missed one question.
Yeah, it was just with regards to the access on Kings Hill.
Yes. I don't think that it's the access is a private way, so they'd have to have permission for both vehicles that serves the residential element and the waste truck. I think the reference is made to the waste truck because we want to make sure that the development can be serviced properly and the waste partnership can adequately get into the site. The assumption is that residents would be able to park there and they would have access. That's something that sits outside the planning application. And it's something they'd have to negotiate, obviously, with the owner of the private way, but it's not a reason to refuse planning permission. I think the particular reference to waste, and Steve might want to comment further on this, is because when we look at major housing developments, we want to make sure that they're serviced adequately and that the waste can be properly picked up from the site without any concerns to the public highway. And this is what this development shows in terms of the tracking and the swept path.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Hannah.
Steve, do you want to come in and just add anything to that if you would like to? And of course, the important point is that in addition to waste vehicles, blue light vehicles can also are also able to access this site, which is another thing that's important. Steve, have you anything to add about that? Just to perhaps to clarify very briefly the status of private roads, because they're quite common, aren't they?
Certainly. The reason it was flagged, Councillor, was that I had to check with Dorset Waste that they could actually get the refuse vehicle into the site. It's as simple as that. And I was obviously informed by them that they will only drive down private roads if they have authorisation to do so. That was made a recommendation to your planners, and the applicant has now confirmed that they have the right to drive the refuse vehicle in. So it's nothing sinister at all. It's just to confirm for your satisfaction that the refuse vehicles can get into the site. The red line, as you can see from the plan in front of us, shows the road itself included within the application area. And as Hannah said, whilst it's outside the planning system, it's basically indicated there that they have a right of access over it. So as I say, nothing sinister, just to flag up that we'd fully considered it.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Councillor Rideout, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'd like some clarification, please, on building materials. I'm a little bit confused from the report. Going to the character paragraph, it's on page 46. The case officer talks about In the immediate vicinity, local building materials are dominated by green sand, and although some smaller properties within the vicinity are rendered, red brick is only evident within the town centre. Then goes on to say, in light of this, some of the materials, particularly on the frontage, and we're talking about Block A here, were revisited and should be predominantly stone, with any coins being in the same material as the elevation rather than contrasting with it. It does go on to say some render is acceptable. So looking at the plans I had in front, which I pulled off the computer and you showed. So on Block A, we have render, and then we have red brick in the middle, and then we have stone. So what has changed, Hannah? Sorry to put you on the spot on this one, but just need clarification, please.
Good question, Hannah. Could we
Yes.
have the picture of the representation of the frontage of the? That's it, love. Thank you.
Yes, the materials are as have just been described. So there's an element of red brick, and that's the reference to it being in a compatible brick with Shaftesbury. There are examples. The dentist surgery adjacent to the site is a red brick type Victorian building. So I wouldn't say it's out of character to have an element of brick here. I think that the materials reflect the requirement to try to break this terrace up so that it doesn't look like a so it has a sort of range of character to it. So this element here would be stone with stone coins. This element here would be brick, samples to be provided, and also a sample panel to be provided on site as well. There's a condition that requires that. And then this element would be render on the corner, which will work fairly well with this sort of curved element that goes around the corner here. So also we have red clay tiles, again red clay tiles, and I think here we have slate tiles.
Slate roof tiles,
yeah. So I think it's that balance between not sort of diluting the quality of it, but having a sort of a mix of materials that are characteristic and are found in the area. I know there's quite a lot of render on the adjacent care home, so I don't think that having an element of render here would be unacceptable. There was discussions with the applicant about materials here, and this was the result of negotiations to actually get an enhancement and have stone in the scheme. But I do think overall the materials are characteristic of Shaftesbury and wouldn't be discordant with the sort of overall character of Shaftesbury in this location. And the benefit here with having these sort of different blocks is almost that it does break up the mass of the building. But that's obviously down, and we have got sort of conditions on large scale details of the sills and window arches, lintel details, dormers and chimneys, that kind of thing, so that the quality of the finished actual product can be controlled. So I understand that paragraph is slightly confusing, and apologies for that, but I think that what you have before you is compatible with Shaftesbury and its character.
Okay, I beg to differ on the render. I'm sure Councillor Tim Cook will back me up on this. Don't like the idea of the render at all. I would also mention about the red brick. Now, in Shaftesbury, in the area, you know, Gillingham was famous for making brick, and it's not a red brick, it's more of an orange brick. So if this proposal does go forward, I think you have to be particularly careful with the colour of the brick, because a dark red could look totally out of keeping with the historic character of the area. I'd also like to just mention that gable end facing north on the end of the stone end there, it says painted brickwork. Again, I just feel this is totally out of character.
The elevation says render on that elevation here, so I'm not sure where the painted brick.
On the end of the on the north.
The other end, I think.
Oh,
The other end, Hannah.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the painted brickwork. Apologies. We do have conditions to control and I do completely take the point on the brick, because it isn't a red brick. It's definitely orange. If you look at the dentist surgery next door, it's an orangey type brick.
It's an orange, yeah.
And that's what we'd want to. That's what we want to. I've got the slide here that shows the adjacent care home. You can tell that it's sort of an orangey.
Oh, definitely. It's an orangey brick.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we have a condition in already that covers this, that we will be managing the choices, the selection of the brick.
We do have that control through the condition 3, which requires the construction and finish of the walls and roofs.
Yes.
So we have control of that. Also, we have windows and door details, large scale details. We have eaves, verges, dormers, chimneys, plinths, sills, window arches, lintel details, and we also have a requirement for a sample panel.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
and
it may be worth putting stone in condition 6, because it actually requires the approved facing brick, and I think we'd also probably want to add potentially stone to that sample panel condition, so it's not just the brickwork that we have control over.
I would say that gable end is going to be very prominent as you come up into the town, because of its position right on the street, the front, street scene. So I think it'd be very careful what colour paint goes on there. If it has to be paint, but preferably stone.
Yes.
Okay. But I think I had clarification from the officer, and it is meant to be stone there. So I think we need to just ensure that the conditions reflect that side elevation should be stone, because you're completely right, because the development will be forward of the dentist surgery there. It will be very visible as you come up the hill into the town. So we definitely want stone on that elevation.
Okay, thank you, Hannah.
Not be painted brick.
Thank you.
Would, if we were to agree those two amendments to condition 3, Councillor Rideout, would that satisfy you?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Heatley. Councillor Heatley.
Thank you, Chair. I want to explore a little bit the viability assessment, which results in the conclusion that there should be no affordable housing here, because on the face of it, it looked odd. After all, we have a general policy about it, and that policy is assessed to see whether it is viable or not as part of the overall plan making process. I looked at the viability assessment provided by the applicant, by Tangent Surveyors, and the answer appears to be that the value of the underlying site is greater than you might expect it to be, because it had the permission to build the sheltered housing. So you're not doing it, this is not like doing it on an agricultural field or whatever. The site was going to cost a lot more money, or at least have a much greater value attributed to it. I then thought, well, hang on a minute, that decision to do the retirement home was made in March 2017, more than 3 years ago. Did it still apply? Because if it didn't, and there was the standard 3-year condition, I've kind of staggering to the conclusion this morning, because I hadn't thought of this before, that maybe starting the demolition on the site meant that planning permission is still extant. In all the papers, people talk about it being extant, but if it was not extant, it seems to me that the assumption that's going into the viability assessment isn't right.
A very good question. Thank you very much. Hannah, could we have, I think the answer is fairly brief, that the planning permission, the previous planning permission, it still stands?
As far as I'm aware, it's still extant and could be implemented, because they did start the development in terms of demolition. Right. I think in terms of the existing use value, the district value is an expert in this field, and they would have had to satisfy themselves that the value for the existing use value of the site was acceptable, and that's why we use the district valuer to look at each input. I don't have in front of me the exact details of how that conclusion was made on the existing use value, but we can be reassured that it's been looked at by the professionals in this field, and they have agreed the inputs in the scheme. It is unfortunate that the scheme can't provide for affordable housing, but we do have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. And I agree with you that the plan looks at viability and it sets the affordable housing thresholds at the reasonable level depending on viability in the wider area. But there are some site anomalies in terms of the levels across the site and the remediation that's required on the site, because it was a petrol filling station, that potentially push this over into not being viable. And I think that's some of the issue why the other scheme, which was far more dwellings, didn't come forward. So I think we have to be mindful of the fact if we want this site developed, we have to take on board the expert advice on viability.
That's helpful. Thank you very much. I mean, just for the benefit of anybody listening, our policy requires us to look at viability, as Hannah has said, on a case-by-case basis. And we base this view on the advice of the independent district valuer, who works neither for us nor for the applicant, but independently, and then both parties take that advice. So it is a fairly robust process, but I take your point. Councillor Heatley, does that answer your question to your more or less satisfaction?
I think it answers the question to my satisfaction about this application.
Yes.
I am a bit worried about the sequence of applications, because it seems to me we've wound up with a situation where we had a rather poor employment site that has gone through a couple of iterations, and we've wound up with it being too valuable for affordable housing, and I can't quite, I'm not quite articulating what's worrying me, but it seems to me that the sequence has led to a situation where, had it just been the employment side that had been before us, maybe the result would have been different.
It may well have been, but we have to, as you know,
we have to do what we
the application that's before us, not a hypothetical different application. But I think you raise an interesting point that we might actually take outside the meeting, because I think there might be some learning for us all from that. But thank you very much.
Sorry, could I just say that it could be possible that the previous permissions not extent, because we've just had a look at the planning conditions and we're not certain they were discharged. But just bear in mind that doesn't have a bearing on this application. It has to be treated on its own merits and stand up on its own merits. And the district valuer would have looked into this and been satisfied with the existing use value.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we do need to make sure that we get these details right in the reports that come to members, but I think your point is well made, that the person who will have looked into this on behalf of both parties is the district valuer, and we're not in a position as the committee to contradict what the view that the district valuer has come to. So I think that's very helpful. Councillor, if you're comfortable, Councillor Heatley, I'll move on to Councillor Pottery. Yes, Councillor Pottery.
Thank you, Chairman. The answer to this question may well be buried in the report and I've missed it. I just wanted to make sure that this application complies with the slopes policy.
To protect the character of the lower slopes in Shaftesbury. So there's an existing local plan policy which talks about the character of the slopes and protecting them, and there's also policies reflected in the Shaftesbury neighbourhood plan, which is at an advanced stage, which talks about protecting the slopes. It would in a way, because the site is screened at the rear there, and the built form is very similar to the surrounding development there. So when you're looking from the lower slopes, it's not going to be obtrusive from that sort of respect. It's similar to existing development in terms of the care home, and it would be screened by the mature trees at the rear. So that the conclusion that's been reached is that it would protect the character of the slopes in Shaftesbury, and also be an enhancement to the immediate conservation area.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you. Good question. Councillor Cook, is yours a question, or please?
It was going to be a question actually regarding the access road and the impact on the existing users of that road. I think, no, yeah, next one back. Yeah, that one. I think this is probably a question for Steve Savage, really. Can you confirm, Steve, that the egress from this site is at the most constricted point of Bleak Street, and that the traffic movements that you are predicting will not have an adverse effect on users of the road, and the sight lines are sufficient to allow views both east and west from that? Because I know from driving down that very constricted part with the King's Arms on the left hand side, certainly it is very hard to see traffic coming as it is when you're actually using the main road rather than trying to join it from this this access point here. And could we also confirm that the possible emergency vehicle access to Abbeyfield House would not in any way be put at risk by the movements of traffic predicted from this development? Thank you, Chairman.
Steve, could you address those two questions?
Yes, certainly, Chair. Hannah, would you be able to go to the photo that shows the view? There's one showing the view to the pub, that one there. Visibility, Chair, has been mentioned by Councillor Cook. When you're approaching towards the site and towards the junction, obviously vehicle speeds are very low because people have negotiated the narrow part of the high street along past Bimport by the carpet shop, and then they're taking a right turn around here. The visibility is actually compliant with requirements for in that particular direction, so that's the lead traffic direction when you were pulling out of the site. And to the left, as you can see from here, you can see up and down the road very clearly. The issue of, obviously for all road users, is that you're coming up to a convergence of Bleak Street, which you can see immediately to the right, joining with New Road, and then we have the car park to the left. There is an awful lot going on, and I know we're reliant on drivers to drive with due care and attention, but as a driver in compliance with the Highway Code, you should be approaching all of those junctions with due care and attention. But to answer your question directly, Councillor Cook, yes, we're satisfied that the access to the site is satisfactory with regards to that road junction, as it was when we previously considered the application for a larger development. With regards to impacts of the development on emergency vehicle access to the adjacent sheltered accommodation, there's no reason to believe that the road itself would be queued at all. The traffic numbers, the predictions are very low, so the 10 vehicles, if you like, in the AM peak really are the worst case scenario as such, and that does equate to effectively one vehicle every 6 minutes. So the likelihood of vehicles meeting there and causing any issues is very, very low. We've got to look at this in realistic terms with regards to traffic generation. I don't feel, and the view of the Highway Authority is that the likelihood of there being any form of obstruction or impact upon the adjacent site is exceedingly low. We've provided more than adequate turning within the site. There's adequate parking. We've ensured we can get all the large vehicles through. And you must remember that the access to the site itself now provides a turning facility at the bottom of Kings Hill, which wasn't there. It isn't there. It's quite difficult. I've got a very small car, but it's very difficult even so to still manoeuvre at the bottom of the hill. So as I mentioned in my presentation, taking all these elements into the round, and particularly the pedestrian game, because I'm well aware that we have elderly residents of the sheltered accommodation wish to walk up Kings Hill. So we've looked to get the footway along that side, the northern side as it were, widened as best we can. There's a very localised pinch point, but it's exceedingly narrow now. It's probably a metre, if not slightly narrower. We've looked to improve that, provide a link then through onto the frontage of the old ATS site there with a raised footway, and providing better visibility for those people to be able to cross immediately into the car park beyond. You can just see to the to the left-hand side where we have the King's Arms, there is a small pathway which runs through there. The desire line would probably take you there, and we feel that we've improved facilities for pedestrians to cross there. So in the round, we're satisfied that it's an improvement on the existing situation. There will be more traffic. I can't lie to you and say there won't be, but we don't feel that that's going to be problematic here. Hence our recommendation. So hopefully that's answered your queries.
That's a very full answer. Councillor Cook, does that answer your question?
It was. I think I didn't phrase the question quite right. Actually, I think it's more from the opposite way. If there were an ambulance, for sake of argument, backing down into that access road and just pulling to the side to pick up a patient from the care home, for sake of argument, that maybe needed to be there for 20, 30, maybe 40 minutes on site, would that cause any traffic congestion or obstruction to users of that road for the development that we're considering?
Oh, I see. I'm with you. Okay, well, the actual Kings Hill itself, it hasn't got a footway on the left-hand side as you go down it, but there is there's a pull-in area. There's a low stone wall, and there's a pull-in area just beyond that where the vehicle, an emergency vehicle in theory, could potentially sit. And that's almost directly opposite the access point here, which then obviously provides its own width. So I think the simple answer to that is that I don't feel there'll be any issues at all. I think there's more than adequate provision for the Abbeyfield to have an emergency vehicle and for the free flow of traffic to be maintained from this development.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Andrews.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My concern is over the access road. So the current owners have granted permission. What about future owners? I'm just asking the question. That's the problem that might occur.
Who'd like to pick that one up?
I'm hoping Hannah will, Chair, but I would just say that, I mean, again, the red line encompasses the access road, so it's implicit that the applicant has control or ownership over it. So one would suggest there's an agreement in place. If that isn't the case in the future, then that's a legal matter to be resolved, I presume. Is that correct, Hannah?
Yes.
Yeah, that would be correct, because they don't have any other access to the property. So there has to be an agreement, normally through granting a covenant or a right of way, which would fall outside of the planning sort of system, for them to access it. Because if the scheme can't be accessed, then there's an issue with the future occupiers, and there's lots of dwellings that are accessed over private land where there's a right of way granted to be able to park in your parking space, and that normally doesn't that's normally a covenant type permission. It wouldn't sort of cease in terms of ownership, it would go with the land, and that's something that the developer is going to have to make sure is in place before the dwellings are sold or rented. But I don't think it's anything we need to worry about today, because the scheme in front of us has been correctly put forward in terms of all of the area in the red line that's required to make the development acceptable. The correct notices have been served, and permissions need to be in place before the development's implemented, and that's quite common across lots of different housing developments where you do have to access the development over private land.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. Councillor Jones.
Thank you. I just wanted to have a quick ask. Is there a communal bin store which will include use by the houses, or will the houses have to have their bins outside the front, because they're not going to be able to keep them out the back and wheel them around the fronts, and that's just going to look so unsightly? Do they have access to a communal bin store at all, please?
Yes, so this is where will the people who in the new houses facing onto New Road, where will they keep their bins?
They would be able to keep them in their rear gardens. There's access along here, so if they keep them on the pavement, they're going to block the pavement. So you would hope that people keep them in their rear gardens, and then they move them to the point of collection on bin collection day. I can't see on the layout plan there's a specific bin store for the houses, but they have got private rear gardens to keep their bins in, and they could keep them by the gate, and then they'd wheel them out to the point of collection when the bin bin collections take place.
Yes.
And Steve, the point of collection would be from the rear, Steve, is that
Yeah,
correct?
If I can just confirm, when I spoke to Dorset Waste, they obviously operate a a curbside collection system here, but the design of these properties is such that obviously, unless you're going to drag your wheelie bins through your house, they're going to be kept in the back garden, which is why we have the gate accessing onto a footway, and then to be collected either within the site or immediately adjacent to it. And the block B has its own bin store as well, which is located very close to where you can see the right hand reversing manoeuvre of the refuse vehicle as such. So we have fully considered this. And again, this is one of the reasons why I had quite an in-depth conversation with Dorset Waste to check they could actually get in and out of the site.
Brilliant. Thanks, Steve.
Good. Thank you. Councillor Fry.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of points that I'd like to bring up, please. I am equally uncomfortable with the access road being a private road with permission granted. For all the concerns I previously said, and as Hannah says, most of them are never cause a problem, but on the rare occasion they do, I want to make sure that we're responsible how we word this, that there should be a condition in the consent that permission over the access to that road is always there. I wouldn't want to hand it over to the residents in 5 years' time or whatever, and they've got to pick up a legal problem that they've got to fight and to gain access along a private road, because I think that's absolving our responsibilities on that one. And adding to that, I'm slightly uncomfortable looking at the layout of the houses there, Hannah, on that diagram we've got in front of us. It feels that they're shoehorning the number of houses in there, and to do that they're having to drop the two end ones back a little bit to make sure they can get a splay and a visibility. What is actually the square footage of those houses they're putting in there? Because looking at the frontage of the old ATS site, it's not that wide there, and you look at the bays and that. What square footage are those houses, please?
In total, or each dwelling, sorry?
Each dwelling in its own entirety, please. The floor square foot, do you know?
I have to see if it's in the report. I don't have that figure to hand.
It just seems to me that we're actually compressing them down and squeezing them in there, and at the same time the plan is bulging because they've happened to drop those two end ones back, and there won't be much amenity land in the rear garden of the two end ones that I'm looking at. There is a massive concern of mine.
That is an area of decking because it's stepped down, so the whole area here would be available.
You can't have a football match in there, can you? Then
you couldn't. That is very true.
I mean, if you can get my point, I think they're cramming them in there. My next point, and if you want to come back to that one in a bit, please, Hannah. It's 2 years ago since Dorset Council declared a climate emergency. 2 years of publicity, of media coverage of what's going on. Here we have a modern development with not a single sign of any renewables on there. No solar panels fitted. There is an ideal opportunity for ground source heating for all the development here to be fitted at source before we start. Water recovery is not mentioned. There is nothing mentioned in this, which I find very disappointing in a modern, recently designed development. Moving my third point, and I pick up on Councillor Heatley's earlier comments about the viability of the site. I find it shameful that they can't find the site for affordable housing. To me, it looks as if the district value has been, for want of a phrase, had over here. When that was a Setire site, that was an abandoned industrial unit that has been knocked down. I accept that they've got the care home permission, which increases the value. And I wonder if this is the same owner who owns the care home, the site now all the way through, because it looks as if we're smoking mirrors here, which has added value to the site, which then makes it unviable because it's there. Once it's gone from the ATS site to the care home with consent on it, that's increased the value. And that's a paper value rather than a real value. So there's my points, please. I just find it, I'm uncomfortable with this one for several reasons. It just looks as if they've shoehorned on there. Had they dropped the two end houses off, that would have made access in there on their own site without having to get permission from a private owner.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Could I just say on the question of I think that your remarks about the district valuer, as you said, having been had over, I'm not sure. I feel that's not really a very appropriate thing to say. at all, and I just like to just
Well,
correct. I think that if I
over.
could please, Councillor Fry, the district valuer is independent of the council and independent of the applicant, and is perfectly competent and works with us on many applications and knows her or his business. So I think it is the council's responsibility to take the recommendations of the district valuer. But Hannah, if you'd like to come in on those, first of all, while Hannah's gathering her thoughts, could I bring Steve in to just clarify Councillor Fry's question about the private access road? Private roads for access to housing development are very common, aren't they? So could you just explain to satisfy Councillor Fry that there's no hidden bear pits in a private access? Access over a private access road.
I don't know if I can satisfy Councillor Fry with the answer I'm going to give him, but it's not unusual for us to have, as you know, residential developments wholly served by private streets, which aren't adoptable and maintainable at the authority's expense. In this instance, it's a fully metalled carriageway which serves the site. So we deem it to be fit for purpose. I can't hand on heart say to you that down the line that whoever owns the road is going to attempt to withdraw the rights, but it complies with the planning process. It's shown a red line which is taken to the edge of the public highway, i.e. New Road, the B-class road, and I would presume, and Hannah might be able to confirm, that the appropriate notices have been served on the landowner accordingly. So I can't give you a surety that that will never happen, but I can only say that in the many years that I've been doing this job, this is quite normal, and I can't think of any instances where we've had problems with this. So I'm afraid I can't give you any more surety than that, Councillor Fry.
Steve, thank you very much for that. I think I just would like to see some wording in the conditions, should this go through, that the appropriate protection is there for future residents, that it's the developer's responsibility to sort out the access and not theirs to pick up the financial burden should any problems occur.
Hannah, could you just clarify, is it possible, to what extent is this within our gift as planning, and is it possible to condition that, or is that out with the planning?
Well, we're conditioning the, thank you, Chair, we're conditioning that the parking has to be provided and maintained for that use. So if it wasn't provided in the way that it's presented here, there potentially be a breach of the condition if it's not laid out and provided for the purpose. So we have some control through the planning conditions. I wouldn't advise that we can go any further than that, and our legal representative might be able to comment further on that, but I think it goes beyond what we are required to do to make the planning application acceptable in planning terms. We're moving into an area where it would be a covenant between the landowners, and we have an acceptable scheme that can be made acceptable with planning conditions that say the access and parking must be provided and made available. So I don't think, unless our legal officer has anything further to add, that we would want to go down that route on this in this case.
Thank you. Lara, are you there, our solicitor? Do you have anything to add? I'm aware of the fact that we can't just put conditions in on a planning application, as it were, willy-nilly. We are constrained as to the conditions have to be reasonable and enforceable. Lara, do you want anything to add to that?
Councillor, I don't really have anything to add to what Hannah's said. She's already talked about covenants, so normally those sort of arrangements would, extend for, a long period of time, so there shouldn't be any issues. And of course, anybody buying a property their solicitor will be doing the appropriate checks to make sure that there is appropriate access. And as Hannah's already said, the access and parking has been conditioned, so there is control in that respect as well.
Okay, thank you. So we have conditioned parking. That would appear to be, Councillor Fry, as far as we can go on that access road. Does that satisfy? Are you happy with that, your first point?
I think so. Thank you, Chair. I think so. My main concern is to avoid any future residents having to pick up a financial legal challenge, but if that's covered.
Good. On Councillor Fry's question about layout, Hannah, have you some response to that?
In terms of the size of the dwellings, Chair?
Yes, please.
Yeah, the planning officer that dealt with this application has confirmed that the dwellings would meet the minimum space standards, which is a nationally set standard on minimum space standards. So you're looking around between 74 to 90 square metres around that for a free bedroom property, depending on the amount of floors it is. So they meet, I don't think we could refuse them in terms of them being too small. In terms of the built up nature of the site, this is a town centre site and the density of surrounding development is fairly high, which reflects its central location. So reducing it for that reason would not really be something we could really pursue in terms of the surrounding development and the higher density that you find within the town centre. We're not looking at a site on the edge of the settlement where you'd look for lower densities. It's a brownfield site where we want to make sure we make the best use of the site, and it still provides adequate accommodation in accordance with the space standards, private amenity area for the dwellings. In a town centre location, you may not always see that. So overall, we haven't found that it's cramped in terms of how much development is proposed.
So you're saying it's at, Hannah, it's at the minimum standard for size for residential.
She said
sorry.
It meets the minimum standard. It's not at the minimum standard.
I don't have the exact size of the units, but the officer dealing with the applications confirmed that it meets the technical guidance on housing standards, which is the nationally described space standards, and they're all set out in that document. So it's not part of our policy at present, but it's a good starting point in terms of whether units are large enough or not.
But basically they wouldn't be, they meet the required standards, the national standards, therefore there would be no grounds to refuse them on the grounds of being too small, is what you basically said.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think the discussion on cramped, that would tie into character. So is this development unacceptable in terms of its character because of the quantum of development? And we consider, and the conservation officer considers, that it's actually compatible with the character of the area. So I'm not certain what the justification would be for removing units in this location. Because
it's a town centre location, so we would expect higher levels of density than on a edge of town location, and we're all familiar with that. Does that answer that question, Councillor Fry?
I think so, thank you. Yes, thank you.
Now the old chestnut that we have every time, the very valid question about renewables and ground source heat pumping not being included. There are no renewable indications here in this report. Can you just comment on this, Hannah? Obviously, as we hear at every meeting, this is a function of building standards rather than planning, and we don't have policy yet that requires that that sustainability standards should be met above the minimum. But Hannah, yes, over to you. Can you comment on that?
Thank you, Chair. I think that was really well summarised. The section on climate implications does talk about it being in a very sustainable location, and that's how our policies ensure that we deliver sustainable development. We put development in the most sustainable place. In this situation, there isn't any additional technology that's been proposed as part of the application that's been identified. But as we said before, it would have to meet the current building regulation requirements, which do require a reduction in consumption in terms of energy over the sort of normal levels. So that's already in place through the building regulations process. We can't, through a planning condition or an obligation, require an enhancement to that at the moment, but we can ensure that when we do look at developments, we ensure that we only grant permission in the most sustainable locations, and that has the benefits of reducing consumption in terms of fuel and everything that goes with that. So we are actually, by following our plan and our spatial strategy, we're almost ensuring that, you know, those technologies will catch up and become much more widely used, but we're putting the development in the place where people can walk to facilities, they can walk to employment, they can access public services, public transport, and that's the real key thing, I think.
And thank you. I accept all your comments, but we also see no point if they are likely to have cars. But there's also no infrastructure mentioned about electric car charging, and it's the overall principle. And I totally agree what you're saying and accept what you're saying about building regs and planning. But actually, a responsible developer would probably be fitting a lot of these in front and making a mention that they're going to put these in at an early stage, because it's easier to fit them at the start than it is to retrofit them all.
That's very true indeed, Councillor Fry. But it's not something that we as the planning committee can insist on at this point. Though again, as I keep saying, let's hope that we get much more robust policies coming out of our new local plan. And of course, if we start asking for more sustainability, then that has the impact on viability. So it is, as always in planning, a trade-off, which brings me to your last question, the question of viability. Hannah, would you please run through that one more time so that we're all very clear about the viability issues and why it's not possible to have affordable housing, and also to remind committee members of the Section 106 offerings that will be coming forward, even though there's no affordable housing, just to be clear about that, because they're not, it's not contributing zero, it's contributing a sum of money, just no affordable housing. Is that right, Hannah?
That's correct, Chair. Just to touch on the electric charging points as well,
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, and there will be more in the new plan about these sort of areas. We do have, as a council, we're developing a strategy for the provision of electric charging points across the area. So I think there will be much more access to this. It might not be just in your own home, but also sort of when you're out and about kind of charging. So as a council, we are doing something to try to address the gaps in provision for electric car charging. And also we're seeing developments come forward for larger scale sort of service station type development. So I think it will get there hopefully quite quickly with the move to electric cars post sort of 2030. But it is a really good point to raise, but I don't think we can insist. It's very much down to the willingness at the moment of developers to want to include those points, but it is becoming more of a requirement through the new plan in that respect. In terms of the viability, we still are requiring the points that make the development acceptable in planning terms. So the contributions towards, if you see in the recommendation on page 50, we have the requirement for a Section 106 agreement to secure the provision towards play facilities in Shaftesbury, play facility maintenance, informal outdoor space, and primary and secondary education. So that was still a requirement, and a 106 would be required to secure that. On the affordable housing point, the advice we've been given is the scheme wouldn't be viable if we required that contribution towards affordable housing or on-site provision, because the district valuer would have looked at both. They would have looked at, is it possible to put it on site, because that's what our policy requires, and then they would have looked at, is it possible to make an in-part contribution towards it. And in this instance, the district valuer has found that it's not possible in this case, considering all the site anomalies and also the other inputs in terms of the build quality and everything like that, and the requirement to use higher quality materials and stone and such like. So that would all have been fed into the report that the district valuer would have produced, and they look at that, and they look at each input in depth and speak to the developer as well and their consultant in terms of viability to make sure that there's a reasonable position on each point. That all feeds into the end result, and in this instance we've been told that we can't provide for affordable housing, so we'd be in a difficult position to try to defend this at appeal. If we have the steer from the professionals that we can't secure it, we wouldn't really have a case if we tried to insist on that, because the applicant would have the possibility to appeal our decision, and we have in the past had situations where we have lost an appeal because we haven't had sufficient grounds to insist on affordable, and unfortunately that is the way we have to treat each application, and we have to have a reasonable position if we are going to insist on affordable housing, that we do have the backing of the district valuer and that there is some viability in the scheme, and it is a a careful negotiation to make sure that it's an acceptable position at the end.
Thank you, Hannah. That's a very useful thing. Obviously, my concern is that the evaluation has been taken of the site with the planning consent from the people's home on it, rather than the valuation of the site as a derelict ATS site, and that distorts the figures. Perhaps is the better way of putting it.
We've already addressed that point earlier, and Hannah's response was that the district valuer would have gathered all the evidence. We don't actually know whether or not the previous application is still extant, but the point is the district valuer would have known that, so the answer would have taken that into consideration. I mean, I think that the thing we have to bear in mind is that, as Hannah has clearly said, if we were to insist on affordable housing on this site, one of two things would happen. We would either lose an appeal because we were ignoring the advice that we'd been given by the independent district valuer, or the scheme would be rendered unviable and would therefore not come forward. And we have also to consider that we do need the homes in Dorset, and we do want homes to be built, and that's our job here. So it is a difficult trade-off, but on this occasion I think we've been given pretty unequivocal and clear information that affordable housing is not going to be delivered on this site, and that we are not in a position to insist on that. And I think we perhaps, much as we hate to see any application come forward without affordable housing, I think we perhaps have to just understand how we come to be in this position. I have now Councillor Cook. Is this a question or a comment?
Oh, I was wondering whether we'd moved from questions to comments.
We haven't
Chairman.
yet. I have one final question from Councillor Heatley, and then I will come back to you, Councillor Cook. Councillor Heatley.
Yes, simple question. When I was looking into this viability business, I looked to see whether the district valuer's report was on the list of reports, and I don't think it was there. Are they normally published?
Hannah.
Yes, a version of the report is normally published for view, and I'll check to see whether it is on the. I can't check now, but I'll check to see if it's available, because that will have the inputs in it and the explanation. But that has been assessed by the planning officer dealing with it, and the independent valuer to look at that. But I will look into that, councillor, to make sure it's available in a potentially a redacted form, but it should be made available.
Thank you very much indeed, members. I think I feel a training session on valuation coming on later on in the year. I'd now like to return to Belinda Ryder comment. Councillor Tim Cook, who is the ward member, to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm actually very heartened by all the comments or the questions that have been put, many of which covered what I was going to ask, but I'm glad other members are taking a good interest in Shaftesbury. You made a comment, Chairman, just a moment ago. We need the houses in Dorset. I absolutely agree we need the houses in Dorset. However, do we need the houses here? Do we need the houses in a specifically sensitive area, shall I say? Because as was made mention at the beginning of this whole item, when visitors drive in and out of Shaftesbury, this is the main car park, or the main car park is absolutely opposite this new development. And I want visitors to, especially when they're leaving, as they drive forwards and see this development in front of them as they leave, they'll have seen Gold Hill, they'll have seen Park Walk, they'll have seen the lovely views out from Castle Hill. And the last thing that they see as they drive away from Shaftesbury will be this development. I feel, and I get the feeling from people that I've been speaking to and people who have been giving me comments regarding this development that it's not complementary to its surroundings. When the last thing you see is possibly render, and thank you, Councillor Rideout, for bringing up the issue of render. I hate it because it has the possibility, and it has the distinct possibility to spoil and to discolour, and I really don't want any render on any building seen as the last thing that people leave, as the last thing that they see when they leave the town. I want them to go away with a wonderful vision of something unique, something wonderful, and I do get the distinct feeling that this isn't. Somebody made the comment to me not long ago that this design is mediocre, repetitive, dull, and unworthy of such an important location, and I feel that myself. The town council has consistently made its comments against the development, and I think the development that has extant planning permission. So I don't think that there is the want in town for this. Hannah, you made mention of the emerging neighbourhood plan, which goes to goes to referendum, I think on the 6th of May, on the same day as local elections. So we are very, very close to that, touch wood, fingers crossed, being approved. Now there are sections in that which do deal with housing in town. We have had a lot of development in Shaftesbury, there's no question about it, and some of it has been good, some of it has not been so good, and I feel that this will fall into the category of being not so good. The viability and the sustainability of this has both contributed to the lack of affordable housing. Councillors Heatley and Fry, I fully support your probing on this. I don't think we've got, I think the argument for the lack of affordable housing has not been made by the developer in any way at all. I think from my own personal view, and it is my own personal view, that the viability, it should be from the planning authority's perspective, not the developer's perspective. And the reason I say that is that if I went out and bought a second-hand car and then tried, or a new car or a second-hand car, and then tried to sell it for what I wanted to get for it, I would be drawn, my return on that would be from what would be paid for it by someone else. It's not my decision. I could want as much as I wanted from it, and I think this is where the developer is coming from, that on their bottom line obviously is their profit margin, and they want to make as much money from this site as possible, and I have no query or no issue with that. But what is required by us as a council is affordable housing with every development, not wherever possible, in my view. I think we should be insisting on it, and I think there is a social argument that could be put forward at, should this ever go to an appeal, that Dorset Council requires by its policies affordable housing. So on that basis, from the complementary with its surroundings basis, from its traffic impact on near neighbours, from the fact that there's no Shaftesbury greenstone there, from the fact that I don't believe it satisfies the neighbourhood plan, the emerging neighbourhood plan. Do we need the houses here? We need them, yes, I agree, in Shaftesbury, in Shaftesbury and in Dorset, but I don't think here. And on that basis, Chairman, I would be very minded to vote or propose and vote against this development.
Okay, thank you. I feel I just need to remind committee members, thank you very much, Councillor Cook, that we have been told 2 or 3 times in this meeting on this question of viability, and I'm quoting Hannah Smith's words back, I think more or less, is that it would be very difficult to defend a refusal at appeal on grounds because there are not sufficient affordable houses in the light of the clear independent advice that we've been given by the district valuer. So I would just remind you of that very clear advice we've been given. I know we want to have affordable housing, but we do need to make defendable decisions here. Hannah will jump in if I've got that wrong.
Chair, could I just say that
yeah.
It's a very admirable aim, and we do want affordable housing on all sites, but we cannot rewrite how we deal with affordable housing in planning terms. It is set out in appeal decisions, in inquiries and such like, how you have to treat affordable housing, and it's not the position, we cannot take the position that it has to be provided at all costs. And that's why even on major schemes such as the Southern Extension in Gillingham, we have to go through that process of identifying the viability. So I completely understand, but I would really caution against refusals on points of principle, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that's very, very clear. On the question of the render, I think we have agreed that we could condition the north elevation of the northernmost building that it would be stone, so that I absolutely understand your dislike of render, but you said that the last thing people see when they leave the town would be render. I think we've agreed that we could condition so that the last thing they see at least is stone, but I absolutely take your general point. I have Councillor Rideout now also would like to comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, first of all, I'd like to say I'm very disappointed there's no affordable housing on this provision on this site, given it's such a sustainable location. And when we read the bulletins from our housing team, desperate for affordable homes and homes at a low cost as well for young families to buy, yes, I am very disappointed. My main concern and disappointment is with the scale, the design, some of the materials and the positioning, particularly of Block A, and the impact this development's going to have on the conservation area of Shaftesbury is not in character with the local historic area. This is a 3-storey, well, looking at Block A, 3-storey with dormers. It's something you would see more down in the town centre on the high street. This location actually demands a transition, because if you look to the south, you can look down the high street, you can see glimpses of the street. If you look to the north, south, west, east, I believe, then you're looking into the car park. But if you look to the north, looking out of that site, you are looking down the road towards Gillingham, and you can see the countryside. There are a few developments, a few dwellings there on the left, but mostly you can see trees, and it's a transition, in my mind, it's a transition area out of the town, and therefore I think this location demands something special. I believe it's too of a high density build right on the street scene at that point, and I believe this development offers less than expected benefits to the residents who will be occupying these dwellings, and for these reasons I don't think I should be supporting this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. You're not supporting. Are you proposing refusal?
Well, I think Councillor Cook proposed refusal.
I believe I did. Thank you.
I will second Councillor Cook.
Okay, I need some grounds. I think you have said, because Councillor, on grounds of scale, design and the impact on the conservation area.
Yes.
Could we include the setting of listed buildings in that, Chair, if that's
yes.
Yes.
I think what Councillor Cook made some valid points about design, scale, materials, and that kind of aspect of the scheme. You also mentioned highway impact. We have a clear steer from the highway officer that there's no highway impact there, but the points about it being a very prominent location and councillors being concerned about it being of good enough quality and design and appearance is definitely something that is a position that councillors could take, but I would not suggest that highway impacts are included or need to be included in that.
No,
potentially.
Thank you, Hannah. No, I would agree. I think we've had a very clear steer. There's not much mileage in the highways. but we have scale, we have design, we have the impact on the conservation area, and we have the impact on the setting of the nearby local buildings. We have materials as well, and we have materials in particular and scale, and because of the fact that this is a prominent and significant location at the entry point to the centre of the town, and the expectation that this location merits something a higher quality than is on offer here.
Could I also make
yes,
sure
please,
that
Tim.
the accordance with the emerging neighbourhood plan, possibly, and being complementary with its surroundings?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. We
Yes.
have the policies are listed, the draft policies, which we can attach significant weight to because it's in an advanced stage now, the
Yes.
plan. We have respecting local character, high quality designs, scale, position and orientation of buildings, creating an attractive public realm, building styles and detailing, and building materials. So we can refer to those policies in the draft plan.
Thank you very much. That's good. Right, Councillor Rideout and Councillor Cook, you're both satisfied with what you're proposing, and that if you are, then I'm going to move to Councillor Heatley, who's patiently waiting to comment. Councillor Heatley. Brian.
Thank you. I would dearly like to refuse this application. I'm concerned about the viability and how it's being calculated, and the fact that it's not completely clear to my mind. I'm concerned, like Councillor Fry, over the disappointments over renewables, and it does seem to me that there are significant issues about appearance. However, this is, unless I've got it dreadfully wrong, we are in a situation where Section 11 of the NPPF applies, that we don't have, what is it, let me get the words right. We don't have the 5-year housing land supply. We haven't passed the housing delivery test, and so there is a presumption that we have to agree developments. And I have a horrible feeling that on appeal, even though all those things I'm not happy with, we're not in the position where the adverse impacts, I'm quoting from paragraph 11, would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. Significantly and demonstrably is quite hard, and I would be rather cautious about refusing it. We seem to be getting into refusing it on the basis of policies we'd like to have, and not on the basis of the policies we've got.
Right.
Could I comment on that, please,
Yes,
Chair?
please. Yes.
You're completely right, Councillor, that we currently don't have a 5-year housing land supply for the former North Dorset area. It's currently standing at 3.3 years. And you're also correct that the housing delivery test isn't passed. In terms of the presumption only applies if we're satisfied that there's no harm to heritage assets such as the conservation area and the setting of listed buildings. If we were to find any harm there, and I think councillors might be identifying that they consider there's potentially less than substantial harm to the setting of the conservation area and the setting of listed buildings, if that's the case, we then need to attach great weight to that harm, and the presumption then doesn't automatically apply unless you can outweigh that harm with public benefits. So it's slightly more complicated than simply applying the presumption if you feel that there is harm to heritage assets. Because in the NPPF there is a footnote which means that if there's certain harm to certain aspects of proposals, we have to take a slightly different approach to our planning balance. In the report, the view has been taken that there's no harm to heritage, so we move on to engage in the presumption, and that's why it's recommended to grant consent. However, if you are going to consider there is harm to heritage, you need to carry out that planning balance that I've just explained.
Yes, and it's worth remembering that offset against the harm that we are discussing here and that we're minded to identify, there is quite a considerable benefits here in terms of that there is a significant number of new homes, a significant improvement to a derelict site, and some highways gains. So the gains are. You will decide, committee, whether or not you think the gains outweigh or don't outweigh the harms, but it's worth remembering that there are quite considerable gains here, including a significant number of new homes, as I say, and some highways gains as well. So you just bear that in mind. I have nobody else waiting to speak. I think we have had a proposer and a seconder to refuse this application on grounds of the grounds that we outlined before, which were essentially scale, design, impact on the conservation area, and the setting of the listed buildings, materials, and all of that in the context of its prominent location. We are not, I hope, including in our grounds for refusal anything about viability, because that doesn't seem to be necessary, or anything about highways, because we've been advised that hasn't any legs. So I think I actually would need to put this to the vote now, bearing in mind, members, that what you're doing here is you're weighing up the harm that we have discussed this morning against the benefits, and the harm principally in the context of the conservation area against the benefits which were presented to us earlier in the report. And you need to now decide whether you want to approve or not approve this planning application in the context of those two choices that you're making. If everyone is ready, I will now put this proposal to refuse this planning application to the vote. Councillor John Andrews, you're for refusing?
Yeah, for the proposal, as you said.
Yes, good, thank you. Councillor Cook?
For.
Councillor Fry?
For.
Councillor Hall?
For.
Councillor Heatley?
Against.
Councillor Jones?
For.
Councillor Parker?
For.
Councillor Penfold?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm against refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Palfrey?
For.
And Councillor Rideout? You
For.
Right. Okay. So the committee then has agreed to refuse this application on the grounds that we've specified earlier. So thank you very much. That was a very useful discussion, and I think you got to a clear enough conclusion. We've been meeting for a fair while. I think I wasn't going to call a break, but I think I will, because that item took rather longer than I expected. So I would now like to have a 10-minute comfort break, in case members feel the need of that. And so we will it's now 11:40, so we will reconvene at 11:50, and I will see you all then. Thank you. Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you're comfortable now. I know it's a little bit tiresome, but the rules require that I take another very quick roll call. So I will just call out your names and you will confirm that you're back in the meeting. Councillor Andrews. Not yet. Councillor Cook. Nobody out there?
I'm out there. I'm here. Les Fry is present.
Thank you, Councillor Fry. Councillor Hall.
I'm here.
Councillor Heatley.
Present.
Councillor Jones.
Yes, here.
Councillor Parker.
I'm here.
Councillor Penfold.
Yes, I'm here.
Councillor Apothecary.
Present.
Councillor Rideout.
Present.
Councillor Andrews.
And Councillor Andrews has left the meeting, but
Right,
Councillor let's see if he can call back in.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cook. So we will proceed without Councillors Andrews and Cook for the moment. They may be having difficulty getting back into the meeting. Right, so our next agenda item then, ladies and gentlemen, 5B. This is planning permission for various flags to be flown on the existing flagpoles at County Hall. So just to be clear, this is planning permission for the flags, not the flagpoles are already in situ and have been in use without any problems for many years. This application simply concerns some new flags or various flags which Dorset Council might wish to fly from time to time. As Planning Officer Hannah Smith would explain, there is a list of flags, a national list of flags that you are permitted to fly without planning permission, the Union flag, of course, being one. But various other flags are treated in this planning context as advertisements, and so we need advertisement permission to fly them. That's why this rather strange planning application is before us today. Just to be clear, it's not a planning matter when the flags are flown or who decides who flies them. It's just we're just being asked to consider the amenity questions here. So Hannah, could I ask you to present your report to us on flags? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So as discussed, the application is for advertisement consent to fly flags that are not on the list of flags that have deemed consent, so you can fly those without any kind of permission. So these are the flags that are flown at particular times of year to celebrate or to mark specific occasions that occur throughout the year. As discussed, they're on existing flagpoles on County Hall in central Dorchester. So there's no proposal for additional flagpoles or anything like that. It's literally just the advertisement consent to fly the flags on the existing flagpoles, which are located on the central entrance to County Hall, shown in this slide here. So here's a picture of the flagpoles on the building. This is where the flags would be located. I'm just going to show you briefly the list of some of the flags that would be flown. They are detailed in the list of conditions. They're a list of flags that we already hold as a council and have flown at various times throughout the year. We're just ensuring that we have the right consent to use these flags when it's required. So in terms of the planning issues that we can consider on this application, it's really just restricted to the amenity of the area and public safety in terms of the highway impacts of the scheme, and also the impact on the character of the conservation area. And there is a listed building, just to mention, opposite in close proximity to the site. Officers consider that there's no harm to flying these flags on the building, on these flagpoles. The amenity of the area would be maintained and there's no public safety issues. Therefore, the application's recommended to grant and subject to the conditions set out in the report. Thank you, Chair.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. I think that's very clear and brief. I've already had I asked them to confirm for the meeting, but John Andrews and Carol Jones proposing and seconding that we accept this. So could I ask Councillor Andrews and then Councillor Jones if you would confirm that for the meeting?
Yes, Chair, I'd like to propose that we accept the recommendations.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jones?
Yes, very happy to second. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Fry, did you have a question?
No, I was going to propose
Good,
it
that's
as,
lovely.
as the ward member.
Good, thank you very much. Councillor Apothecary as the chairman of council. Val.
Thank you, Chairman. Hannah's explained most of this actually, and this application has come about because there was no Dorset Council flag raising policy. On investigation, it was discovered that planning consent is required for any flag to be flown other than the usual union flag, etc. And every so often the council would like to raise a flag to recognise a particular sector of our society. The upcoming National Health Service, Social Care and Frontline Workers Day on the 5th of July is a typical example of this. But to ensure that planning consent is not required in the future, the council requests that the application be amended so that blanket consent is given to raise any flag that the chairman of the day deems appropriate. I'd be very grateful for members' support in this matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think on the NHS flags it says NHS flags, which covers a whole range of NHS flags. Hannah, Val has asked if we can amend this to various flags. I think the answer is going to be that we can't. We have to stick with the list that we've got. Is that correct?
Yes, it would have to be slightly more precise than that, because this is what we normally ask applicants if they wanted to have advertisement consent, to be fairly precise about what they were going to have in their advertisement. So we can't have a blanket allowance, but we have changed the description slightly, just you would have seen on the slide, to include any national health flag and also any emergency services flag, to ensure that that category of flag is included and something that we could fly. If in future we had any different flags, there may be the requirement just to seek consent again, but that shouldn't be too much trouble in the future, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, so I think because I did ask the same question myself, Councillor Apothecary, if why can't we just say such flags as Dorset Council would like to fly from time to time, and the advice from the solicitors was that that was too broad, and that given that this is advertising consent, we have to be compliant with the same degree of advertising consent that we expect members of the public to apply, and we wouldn't be likely to say to another organisation such flags as you would like to fly from time to time. We would want them to be more precise. So it was a good question, well asked, but the answer is that this is as broad as we feel that we're legally able to go, but it does cover the flags that we want to think. Councillor Cook, do you have a point here before I put this matter to a vote?
Yes, Chairman, thank you. It's the converse of the question that Councillor Apothecary just asked. Is it possible that we can extend to all residents of Dorset the same permission to fly the flags that we are intending to fly? It seems that it seems in a way that we are saying that we can do this, but they can't. Specifically, the ones that have been listed that we have said that we are allowed to fly. I think it would be common courtesy to extend that to all.
It might feel courteous, but it wouldn't be very valid in planning terms. This is a planning permission for advertising consent, and like any planning permission, it would have to be taken. Each planning application would have to take. There's no such thing as a blanket planning permission, and this is a planning permission. Of course, it might be completely inappropriate for certain flags to be flown in certain circumstances. I can't think of any, but that might happen. So it's a nice thought, Councillor Cook, and I understand your desire for courtesy, but I'm afraid that's not how planning works. There's no such thing as a blanket planning application, a blanket planning permission. So could we, if there are no further questions, could we put this matter to the vote? And I will call your names, whether you're for or against. Councillor Andrews.
4.
Councillor Cook.
4.
Fry.
4.
Paul.
4.
Heatley.
4.
Jones.
4.
Parker.
4.
Penfold.
4.
Apothecary.
Abstain.
Oh yes, and Rideout.
4.
Good, thank you very much indeed. So that's neatly given the council the planning permission to fly various flags, and that's a good job done. Thank you very much indeed, members, and anybody who's still listening. For I think that was a useful meeting, and I think 1 or 2 learning things came out of that. I think certainly some further in-depth training on this whole question of viability would be quite, I don't mean training, I don't mean to imply that you don't know, but a kind of a member session on viability would be quite useful. So thank you very much indeed, and I'm closing the meeting now at 12:01. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.